Welcome to an AAHRPP educational session on applying for accreditation. AAHRPP offers a day-long workshop at our annual conference on how to apply for accreditation. In 2020, because of the COVID-19 public health emergency, we are providing this pre-conference workshop through a series of videos. In recognition of these unusual circumstances, we are providing these videos free as a resource to the community. We are extremely grateful for our presenters from the conference who were excited to move forward and provide education through videos. We thank all of them for generously devoting their time and extensive experience. I will now turn it over to Amal Alomari from King Hussein Cancer Center and Rhonda Aleppo from UT Southwestern Medical Center.
Thank you, Robert. So we'll start off today with the disclosure statement. Amal has no relevant disclosures or relationships to disclose, and I am an AAHRPP site visitor, but I have no other relevant relationships to disclose today. So our learning objectives for you are to know how to identify stakeholders at your institution, which are necessary during the accreditation process, develop strategies for conducting your own gap analysis, identify the resources available to you to help with the self-assessment, and learn about some of these self-assessment experiences from domestic and international sites. And now I will turn it over to Amal to walk you through preparation of your self-assessment.
Thank you, Rhonda. So what is self-assessment? It's a systematic review of all components of the Human Research Protection Program using the evaluation instrument. So you need to review your written materials, your policies and procedures, to make sure that they are complying with AAHRPP accreditation standards. And you will also need to validate your practice to make sure it matches your written policies and procedures. Now, accreditation uses a set of objective standards to evaluate the quality and level of protection that the organization provides to research participants. So in the self-assessment, you will be critically examining your human research protection program element by element using the evaluation instrument. You need to identify supporting documents for each standard and element, and this will actually be section C of the application, or what we call the element by element index. Supporting documents will become section D of your application. This is an overview of the self-assessment process, which we will go through in detail in the following slides. So first, you need to start by obtaining your administration buy-in and support. And this is actually very crucial because leadership support is critical to implement a change when necessary, especially in other departments. At King Hussein Cancer Center, to assure the quality and performance of the protection program, it was decided that the final accountability of the program's mission, goals, and success, or failure thereof, resides with our Director General, who assumed the role of the program leader, or what AAHRPP calls the institutional official. Next, you need to define your human research protection program. So you need to know which accreditation standards apply to your program, and you must meet, and you need to identify stakeholders in your organization. These can be ancillary offices, safety committees, compliance department, legal department, and so on and so forth. To start preparing for assessment, you need to assemble an accreditation team and to develop a timeline. At my institution, accreditation was planned as a project. So we assembled a project team and assigned a project manager who was a BMB certified knowledgeable person that agreed to lead the team through the gap analysis and self-assessment. For now, I'm going to give you examples about the stakeholders at KHCC, which included our Director General, the institutional official, the IRB, the Research Council, the Office of Research, which I lead, investigators and physicians, the pharmacy department, medical lab, medical records, nursing department, the quality assurance office, the finance department, the IT department, the JFDA, or the Jordan Food and Drug Administration. This is actually the regulatory authority in Jordan, and of course, patients and research sponsors. Also, you need to know that in order to assess your human research protection program, you will need to analyze your processes and your written documents or your policies and procedures, and you need to validate your practice. Now, planning for accreditation. So after obtaining your leadership support, you need to start by defining your human research protection program. So you need to know what components are applying. Is it your entire organization or components of the organization? Maybe the organization in collaboration with another entity, for example, a medical school and or affiliated hospital. Also, you need to know your research portfolio. So what is the type of research conducted at your institution? Is it biomedical research, social behavioral research? Do you conduct international research? Also, the types of research funding. Is it intramural, extramural, governmental, a mixture of all? Moreover, what laws does the organization follow? Is it the Department of Health and Human Services, the FDA, the VA, the Department of Justice, or other? Of course, all of these are US specific. So if you reside in an international organization outside the United States, you may not need to follow any of these, which was actually the case for King Hussein Cancer Center. You may follow the ICH-GCB E6 for good clinical practice. And here you need to check your contracts, as there may be contractual requirements for this. Or there may be other state, provincial, or country-specific laws. For example, in Jordan, we are required to follow the Jordanian law for clinical studies, as well as the ICH-GCB E6 for good clinical practice. So how the Human Research Protection Program looks in different institutions can be widely different. On the left here, you see the different entities supporting the Human Research Protection Program at KHCC, while on the right, it's the Human Research Protection Program at UT Southwestern. So you have to work through the environment and the resources you have at your institution and decide how you build your HRPP. Continuing through the planning phase, I did mention that at KHCC, we planned accreditation as a project. So we assembled a team, assigned a project manager who was a PMP certified staff member, relieved of all other duties and dedicated entirely for the project to lead the team through gap analysis and self-assessment. For our institution, we agreed that the execution of the project will be based on 3 phases. First, domain 2, process review and development. So domain 2 is the domain that AAHRPP defines for the IRB or ethics committee. Second, domain 1 and 3, process review and development. So domain 1 refers for the organization and domain 3 for researchers and research staff. And thirdly, the accreditation process. This table here only shows major project milestones such as completion of a project phase or gate review. There were, of course, smaller milestones which are not included in this table, but were included in the project schedule and work breakdown structure, or what we call in project management, the WBS. Any approved changes to these milestones were communicated to the project team by the project manager together with how they impacted the timeline. Next in planning for accreditation is to assemble the accreditation team. So you would need a program leader, facilitators and authorizers, a project manager, project team, and a project consultants. And let me stress here that this is how we did it at King Hussein Cancer Center. And every organization can be different in terms of what resources are available and how you utilize them. For program leadership at KHCC and to assure the quality and performance of the protection program, our Director General assumed the role of the institutional official or the program leader with the following responsibilities: to enforce the program, to assure independence of the program, to assure human research protection requirements are supported by the required processes, structures, and staffing, and to establish a human research protection program oversight committee, which I will come to shortly, to oversee the program and its progress as deemed appropriate. Project facilitators and authorizers at King Hussein Cancer Center, these were the research director, actually myself, the research council chair, and the IRB chair, with the following responsibilities: to facilitate the project requirements and needs, to review and approve the project plan, to act as spokespersons to higher levels of management, and to gather support throughout the institution, also to promote the benefits of the project and to provide go, no-go decisions. The project manager had the following responsibilities: to develop the project management plan, to keep the project on track in terms of schedule and budget, to identify, monitor, and respond to project risks, to provide accurate and timely reporting of project metrics, and to communicate with facilitators, team, and stakeholders. The project team who actually carried out the project were the project manager, our research quality assurance specialist, the research office staff, the IRB coordinator and members, and the research council members. So they carried out the project work and assisted the project manager in project execution. Project consultants are needed for functional support, and these can be from the different HRPP component offices, such as the quality department, the IT department, the pharmacy, the medical labs, the finance, etc. And they can provide administrative support, sometimes subject matter expertise, also resource alignment with project needs, as well as communicate with the project manager on issues that may impact the project progress and support. Again, accreditation teams do not look the same at every institution. So you need to find what works for your institution. This is a comparison of the accreditation teams at King Hussein Cancer Center and UT Southwestern. I just explained how our team at KHCC was assembled. Maybe Rhonda would like to say something here about how they did it at UT Southwestern.
Thank you, Amal. I found it really interesting when we compared UT Southwestern to King Hussein Cancer Center. At UT Southwestern, of course, we relied on our institutional official, IRB chairs, and other HRPP component offices for any input during the process. However, the bulk of the work was really completed by me with the support of my associate director. This is a really important comparison because you should know that you can have a highly organized team and process like King Hussein Cancer Center, or you can complete the work in a more grassroots fashion like we did at UT Southwestern. AAHRPP does not prefer one over the other, as either approach can be and is effective. Thanks again, Amal.
Thank you, Rhonda. So part of our work in planning for accreditation was establishing a Human Research Protection Program Steering Committee. And I remember that at this stage, we consulted with AAHRPP, and they said that this is considered best practice, but is not mandatory. However, we believe that it can help our program succeed by involving all stakeholders in the decision-making process and have them as partners in success. So the committee was established to provide independent advice, assistance, and recommendations with regards to the HRPP program, and it had the following responsibilities. First, annual evaluation of the HRPP program, managing and administering funds and resources allocated to the HRPP program, review and approval of the program standard operating procedures, review and approval of plans for continuous improvement activities, review and approval of research, education, and training activities, as well as handling issues of escalated non-compliance. And for membership, as I mentioned, it included representatives from all the HRPP stakeholders. Now, an important part of the planning is to plan for budget. And this is also why it's very important to involve and obtain the buy-in of higher administration, since there will be financial commitments attached to the decision to pursue accreditation. So you need to prepare an accreditation budget, which includes initial and annual application fees, site visit costs, and this can include room rentals, printing materials, IT costs, etc. Also staffing costs. So at KHCC, we needed to hire an HRPP coordinator and a research administrator, training and education costs, and public outreach costs. For carrying out the self-assessment, there are many resources that you can revert to. There is the AAHRPP evaluation instrument available on the AAHRPP website. There are also many tip sheets available that can give you ideas on how to meet the requirements for each standard or element. You can also consult with other accredited institutions on what they did to meet a certain standard or element. So actually, you do not really need to reinvent the wheel. Many of these accredited institutions share their policies and procedures on their external websites, so they are available for you to refer to and get inspired by what others have done to meet the requirements for certain elements. And of course, you can always consult with AAHRPP staff, who were very supportive and helpful throughout our accreditation journey. Now, for tracking the self-assessment, you can use an accreditation checklist or worksheet for gap analysis, which I will show you in a minute. Before that, let me explain briefly how to use the AAHRPP evaluation instrument. AAHRPP has defined domains of responsibility: domain 1 for the organization, domain 2 for the IRB or ethics committee, and domain 3 for researchers and research staff. Within each domain, there are standards, and for each standard, there are elements that provide more specificity for the standards. Now, each element contains 5 sections. The first section is the commentary, and this section provides an explanation of how to interpret the element. The second section, regulatory and guidance references, which can be a country-specific law, a US federal agency regulation, or maybe the ICAT GCBE 6 guidelines. The third section, required written materials, and this refers to all types of written materials that the organization uses to define and communicate its practices, which can be official policies and procedures, SOPs, policy statements, procedure descriptions, checklists, guidelines, educational materials, job descriptions, and so on, so forth. The fourth section is common types of materials that may be used to meet the element. And these would be examples of the types of materials organizations have provided to meet the element. AAHRPP here does not desire to limit flexibility or creativity, but rather listing of common types of materials that may be used is intended to be helpful by providing guidance only as a facilitative tool. The final section, the outcomes section, these are the practices that an organization should have in place in order to meet the requirements of the element. For gap analysis, we used an accreditation checklist or worksheet. So we did an accreditation checklist for each of the 3 domains, the organization, the IRB or ethics committee, the researchers and research staff. And we worked through it by standard and by element. This is an example of accreditation checklist or worksheet for domain 1, which is the organization domain, standard 1.1 and element 1.1a, which states that the organization has and follows written policies and procedures for determining when activities are overseen by the Human Research Protection Program. So we summarize the specifics of the element by referring to the evaluation instrument and tip sheet 2, indicated whether we have an SOP available at KHCC, what are the policies and procedures available that cover this element. Of course, this means that we need to review this particular SOP and make sure that it covers all the specifics of the element. This is another example of a worksheet where you can summarize the element, applicable regulations, available SOPs, if any, the gaps, responsible parties working on this element, due date, forms to create if needed, other resources available, and then check when completed. Of course, planning timelines and establishing deadlines is very important for the success of any projects. So you would be gathering information and input, developing new policies and procedures, maybe editing existing ones, educating IRB members, researchers, and research staff, correcting compliance issues, shifting culture toward the notion of protecting research participants is a shared responsibility, preparing your application while at the same time working towards a deadline. So in order to achieve all of this, you would of course be delegating responsibilities. It's eventually a teamwork and each member of the team will be responsible for certain deliverables. You would need to schedule regular meetings for proper follow-up and communication between the team. And it would be optimal if you had a communication management plan to organize the communication framework for the project and to have it updated as communication requirements change. Of course, also tracking the project and milestones to make sure that you are abiding to the timelines established for completion. I showed you this before. These were the project milestones we decided upon at our institution, and any approved changes to these milestones were communicated to the project team by the project manager, together with how they impacted the timeline. This was the communication management plan for the project at KHCC, which guided the communications throughout the life of the project and was updated as communication requirements changed. We used Microsoft MS Project for the management of the project, so we were able to very specifically define a project schedule and work breakdown structure, or the WBS. So if you use this tool, then you can estimate accurately how many hours you would need to complete certain domains and total hours for the whole project, which mounted up to close to 5,000 working hours for our team at KHCC, or almost 2.5 years of work. Of course, this can be widely different from organization to organization, depending on the amount of work that needs to be done. This is the resource calendar generated by MS Project. So you'd be able to tell visually the level of involvement of each human resource working on the project as the project progresses. Now, please always remember that done is better than perfect, and you should aim for protection, not perfection. Now, I'm going to hand it over to Rhonda, who is going to walk us through the assessment process.
Thank you, Amal. So Amal talked to you about preparation and planning for the assessment. And now I'm going to walk you through the actual assessment process. At UT Southwestern, we loosely applied the Deming cycle for continuous quality improvement to the assessment process. With that PDCA or Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, you would begin with planning the improvement activity. At this point, you'll conduct your gap analysis by evaluating any written materials and processes and compare them to the AAHRPP standards. So ask yourself what you have and what might be missing. Once the gap analysis phase is completed, you move on to the do step of the cycle. Here, you will actually begin by drafting and revising materials and processes to fill the gaps that you identified in the first step. Once those gaps have been filled, or at least you think they've been filled, you'll need to validate them. This is represented as the check step of the cycle. Here, you will validate and assess the new policies, materials, and procedures against the AAHRPP standards. Finally, when you have everything completed, you'll need to implement those changes, and this is referred to in the cycle as ACT. At this point, you'll educate everyone on the changes. This is an awesome opportunity to shift the culture at your institution into an accreditation mindset and ensure that what you have written down to meet the AAHRPP standards is actually being practiced. You may also further refine and improve the processes at this time. Now, I said at the beginning of this slide that this is a continuous quality improvement. That means you'll continue this cycle several times during the self-assessment process. In fact, you'll continue this process again and again over the life of the accreditation and reaccreditation experiences. Now, to start the process, you need to know how to find all of your institution's applicable written materials. So this might include policies, procedures, consent templates, checklists, letter templates, etc. These materials will not only come from the IRB, but will likely also come from other offices such as sponsored programs, for example, contract templates. Your conflict of interest office will need to provide you with their policies or any templates that they have for management plans and disclosures. Now, to further describe written materials, two of the most common written materials that you'll be assessing in this process are policies and procedures. Policies describe a strategy, goal, or objective, while a procedure, on the other hand, describes how you will actually operationalize a policy. In my opinion, the written procedure is extremely helpful to ensure compliance with policies. For example, procedures will provide definitions of key concepts. They will include step-by-step actions to be taken, as well as who's responsible for those actions. Your procedure may also include the timing of the actions. For example, when following Department of Defense requirements, you must report any serious or continuing noncompliance to the DoD Human Research Protection Officer promptly, which is defined in the AAHRPP evaluation instrument as within 30 days. So you'd want to include this requirement and timeframe in your written policy and procedure manual if you're following DoD regulations. So there are different systems of written materials, and the first system here on this slide is a tiered system, and it's a great example of the types of materials that we use at UT Southwestern. We have a consent policy, but we also have written guidance documents for our researchers that help them to interpret the consent policy, which, as you can imagine, is quite long. Our analysts also have checklists that they use, and those checklists include all of the required consent elements, as well as a review manual or a review procedure, which functions as a desk manual for them, and it actually describes how to complete their work in minute detail and even includes pictures. We also provide our researchers with informed consent templates that we post on our website. Now, alternatively, some institutions may only use a policy manual and they don't have the additional checklist, guidance materials, and templates. Either system is acceptable as long as all of the AAHRPP requirements are addressed in your written materials. So as you evaluate the materials, consider and address each element of the accreditation standards. Do your activities achieve the outcomes outlined in the evaluation instrument? Do you have the required written materials? Are you following the practices that are described in the evaluation instrument? And do any of your written materials contradict each other? We experienced some of that at UT Southwestern. There was information in an old guidance document on our website that had not been updated with recent policy changes. So we quickly removed it from the website, and then we had to determine whether it should be discarded or updated for consistency. And finally, when you do identify your gaps or inconsistencies like that, make sure that you document them either on your worksheet, as Amal had showed you, so that you can address them later in the assessment process. To evaluate the materials against the AAHRPP requirements, you can use worksheets, as Amal showed you, or what we did at UT Southwestern is we used the evaluation instrument, also known as the AAHRPP Bible to us, and any available tip sheets, which are conveniently linked from the evaluation instrument, as well as the AAHRPP application section C, which is really the bulk of your AAHRPP application. I personally found this method beneficial because it gives you a good jump on completion of the actual application. So what we did is we, using 1.1b as an example, we first used the evaluation instrument to identify the essential requirements for that element. Element 1b, the essential requirements also include requirements for the VA and Department of Energy. However, at UT Southwestern, we don't follow VA or Department of Energy requirements, and so I limited my effort to just the first section under number 1. Number 1, as you can see, has 2 different requirements. And because we don't have more than one designated institutional official found under 1B, I only needed to address 1 requirement in this element. So what I did at that time is I copied that 1 requirement from the evaluation instrument and pasted it into my section C working document. So then I move on to the common materials section of the evaluation instrument, and it gives you an idea of how to meet those requirements. So here on section C, we listed any items that we already had and made a note for what might still be missing. Notice that the evaluation instrument provides the suggestion, a letter or memorandum from senior management. So we had this already and we referenced it. However, we noticed that we were still missing materials that described our institutional officials' duties. So we made a note to find this document in the next step. We continued the process of bringing over any necessary information and documents that we had and making notes throughout the entire section C until we've completed all 3 domains. Now, while assessing written materials, you should also assess the process. To do this, you can map your different processes. Research oversight processes are often complex, and they include a lot of steps and numerous stakeholders. This is true for different IRB review processes, contract execution, handling of investigational drugs, etc. So refer back to your processes map as you complete the self-assessment of written materials. This process mapping allows you to highlight any gaps and consider how you need to fill those gaps. Often, you'll need to change processes as a result of the written material changes, so keep that in mind. And remember, the process is dynamic. This will be a work in progress until you've completed the assessment. Therefore, be prepared to change your process maps a few times. This here is an example of the research administration process from the King Hussein Cancer Center, and I think it pretty clearly demonstrates the complexity and different stakeholders that are represented in the swim lanes. So after you've assessed the materials and processes, now's the time to start to fill those gaps. So you'll want to engage any appropriate stakeholders in this process, develop and revise materials and procedures that are necessary, and compare again to the AAHRPP elements. Make sure that as you're going through this, that you're keeping your worksheets or section C updated. After you've completed the process of updating your written materials, you'll need to review the changes and validate them. So ask yourself, do all the materials and processes meet the AAHRPP requirements in real life? Some things look really good on paper, but they're not effective when they're actually implemented. Ask whether everyone can follow the new and revised policies and procedures. Make sure that you're also involving other stakeholders and AAHRPP component offices. Consider convening a focus group to discuss changes and ask if the changes are sustainable, efficient, effective. At UT Southwestern, we have an AAHRPP steering committee that I stood up as part of our assessment process. That steering committee meets quarterly and includes leaders from each of the AAHRPP components, as well as performance sites. I found that it's really important to have the input from all of the key stakeholders on any policies or procedures before I implement them. The steering committee ensures that there's communication, continuity, and transparency across the institution's AAHRPP. This committee was essential during our self-assessment, and it continues to be a vital part of our AAHRPP as we continue to evolve. Now, I've also convened an AAHRPP focus group, and the focus group is made up of IRB members, investigators, and research coordinators. And I meet with the focus group monthly and keep them apprised of any new initiatives and obtain their feedback before implementing changes. In my opinion, both of these groups are worth their weight in gold, and you'll want to pass by them any of these new changes that you've made before implementing them. Once you've completed the validation process, now you need to consider if you need to make further adjustments to the policies or procedures. And if so, go ahead and make them at this time, but consider getting additional feedback from the stakeholders before you actually implement. So now once all elements have been addressed and corrected, you should implement the changes to standardize them or further refine the process. Spend time on change management, set up training sessions. At UT Southwestern, we have monthly research forums where we discuss changes in policies and procedures. We also send out announcements on our listservs and include those updates on our website as well. At this time, you should begin compiling your Step 1 application. As you compile it, go through the process again of assessing, revising, validating, and implementing changes. This is a continuous improvement process and will continue throughout the life of your accredited program. So in summary, utilize your available resources, especially those provided by AAHRP, such as the evaluation instrument, tip sheets, webinars. Reach out to other accredited organizations for suggestions or guidance. We've all been there and we're happy to help each other. Make sure you manage the process. It's easy to let it get out of control and to feel impossible. Avoid scope creep and don't reinvent the wheel. There are likely others out there who've tackled something that you're working on, or you can use examples from the AAHRP tip sheets. For example, the tip sheet on contract language. Don't try to rewrite it or invent it. Just use the sample language and ensure that your legal office approves of it. It takes the guesswork out. Finally, set a deadline and stay on schedule. Just complete the process and move on to the next step. If you miss something, don't worry. AAHRP is there to help and will give you the opportunity to correct it. After all, this is a peer review process. And remember, done is better than perfect. That's the mantra I live by in my professional life, maybe not so much in my personal life. But without it, I would not have been able to submit the application on time and complete the process. So if you have questions, please feel free to contact either of us directly. We've been where you are and can assure you that the self-assessment process, while challenging, is extremely rewarding. Thank you for joining us. That's all we have. We appreciate your time and wish you luck in your self-assessment.
Thank you, Amal and Rhonda. We really appreciate your excellent support for human participant protections and AAHRP during this difficult time. This concludes this presentation, but please check our website for other videos in our pre-conference series on applying for accreditation.